The Healer, the healing work of Mary Baker Eddy, compiled and arranged by David Keyston. Part 3. Though they stumble and fall, yet they rise again the stronger. Mary Baker Eddy, 1890. Mary Baker Eddy's Healing, the first week of February, 1866. Number 30. In early 1866, Mrs. Patterson, as Mrs. Eddy was then known, was living in Swampscott, Massachusetts, at 23 Paradise Road. On the first evening of February 1866, Mary Patterson was on her way to a meeting at the Good Templars Lodge in Lynn. The conditions of that evening were severe. The temperature was below zero, and there was snow and ice on all the streets and walkways. Perhaps the account of Saturday, February 3rd, 1866, appearing in the Lynn Reporter, is the most widely known description of what followed. Mrs. Miriam Patterson of Swampscott fell upon the ice near the corner of Market and Oxford Streets on Thursday evening, February 1st, and was severely injured. She was taken up in an insensible condition and carried to the residence of S.M. Boubier, Esquire, nearby, where she was kindly cared for during the night. She was removed to her home in Swampscott yesterday morning, though in a very critical condition. Number 31. Mrs. Eddy describes the particulars of this momentous event and discovery during an interview years afterward. Quote, "I slipped upon the pavement, fell across the curbstone, and that induced an injury that they considered as fatal as if my head had been severed. The papers I have clippings from advertised me as fatally injured, and the doctors said they could do nothing for me, but chloroformed me and took me home on a mattress. When I got home, the dear ones around me said, 'If you can't live, tell us something. Do tell us something as you always do of your views.' And I said to them, 'Why, I can't conceive in this vestibule that there is death.' I was then in a position that I do not like to name because I want to dismiss it from my mind, but it was called spinal dislocation. I said, 'It does not seem death to me. Life seems continuous, and my father's face dearer than ever before.' And as I talked, they did not know what to make of it. Finally, I said to them, 'Won't you leave the room a little while? I'm getting oppressed.' The clergyman was just about to come and see me, and he entered, and then he talked with me a little, and he said, 'You seem near heaven. Do you realize that you cannot recover?' I said, 'They tell me so, but I cannot realize it.' And he said to me, 'I must see you again. I am engaged now. But I will call in a little time. I want to see you again living, if I can.' He stepped out and was gone perhaps a half hour. I requested the others to leave the room, and they did. Then I rose from my bed perfectly sound. Never knew health before, as I was always an invalid. I went downstairs and met Mother. Mrs. Baker had died in November of 1849. The clergyman returned. He was so startled he did not know whether to conclude it was I in the body or out. He said, "What does this mean?" I said, "I do not know." The doctor was sent for who had given me up and was not coming again. He said, "How was this done?" I said, "I cannot tell you in any wise whatever, except it seemed to me all a thing or state of my mental consciousness. It didn't seem to belong to the body or material condition. When I awakened to this sense of change, I was there. That is all I know. It came to me in a bit of Scripture, Matthew 9, verse 2. And I immediately rose from my bed, and before that my feet were dead. He said, "It is impossible that could have been. It must have been the medicine." I said, "Your medicine is every bit in the drawer. Go and look." There it was in my drawer, and I had not taken one bit of it. When I had showed him that, he said, "This is impossible." And immediately I felt I was back again, and I staggered. He caught me and set me in a chair, saying, "There, I will go out. If you have done that much, you can again." My limbs crippled under me, just like that. This is veritable. There are people living in Swampscott now who can tell. When I found myself back again, I felt more discouraged than ever. As I sat there, it all seemed to come to me again with such a light and such a presence, and I felt it is all the mind. These are spiritual stages of consciousness, and rose right up again. Then I felt I never could be conquered again, and as they came rushing in, I said, "Do not talk with me much at present. Wait a little, and I will tell you all I can." And they would keep me up till 12 o'clock talking. And I stood it, and at that time I had a big task of material duties. My husband happened to be gone, Dr. Patterson, and I seemed in such a bother I did not know what to do, until at last I got away a little while, and then I began to steady down and say, "I can tell this, and the world can know what it means." And from that time I have demonstrated it. End quote. This experience was the catalyst for Mrs. Eddy's discovery of the science of mind healing. She recounts in her book, Retrospection and Introspection, the subsequent steps to this experience, and prior to the publishing of the first edition of her textbook, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. See appendix for pages 24 to 39 of Retrospection and Introspection. Number 32. Following Mrs. Eddy's fall, and 3 days later her subsequent rise from her deathbed, a most fascinating report appeared in the Lynn Reporter of February 7th, 1866. The dead alive. The people of Norwich, Connecticut are much exercised about an occurrence which took place in that city a few nights since. On Sunday night, the resurrectionists dug up the body of a young lady who had been buried that afternoon, and succeeded beyond their anticipations. She had been buried while in a cataleptic fit, and upon being exposed to the night air, animation was restored. The resurrectionists fled, and she walked home. Her parents refused to admit her, believing her to be a ghost. She then went to the house of a young man to whom she was engaged. He took her in, and on Monday morning they were married. This reads like romance, but it is said to be the literal truth. Number 33. Another report was related by Elizabeth Earl Jones, one of the early workers in the cause of Christian Science. I spent most of the winter of 1909 to 1910 in Boston, as I was taking time off for quiet study and work after a very strenuous year in the State Publication Committee work. I was committee for North Carolina. I felt the need and great desire for a time for quiet and uninterrupted study. Knowing that I had a free time, so to speak, one of the members of our Christian Science Board of Directors in Boston asked me if I would look over a bundle of old newspapers from Lynn, Massachusetts, for the month of February 1866. And see if there were any items of interest that could be attributed to this greatest event in history, accepting the life of Jesus. I found one item of great interest under date of February 12th, 1866, I think it was. It was the account of a miracle that had happened in Lynn on or close to that date. A girl, 12 years of age, who had been an invalid all her life, had died, and was lying in her coffin with the lid open so that the family and friends could see her before the coffin was finally closed and taken to the burying ground. She had been dead 2 or 3 days, when she suddenly opened her eyes, sat up, and was perfectly well. Of course, there was no funeral. The doctor could not account for it, so they all said it was the work of God and a miracle. From Matthew. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Number 34. Mrs. Eddy states in the 3rd edition of Science and Health, there were results connected with our recovery at the time we have named that rendered it still more remarkable, which we have not given to the public. One of these results was mentioned in a letter to a student of hers, Caroline W. Frame, in later years. The first experience of mine in entering upon the discovery of Christian Science was the entire stoppage of the periods that are believed to be concurrent with the moon. Hence that saying of the revelator of the spiritual idea, the moon was under her feet. See Revelation 12, verse 1. Often it seems to be discouraging to hear my female students talk of this period as if it was part of their life, normal and scientific. From Mark. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. For she said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him, and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. Number 35. There were two fascinating occurrences that took place in February 1866 as well. Events of nature that were most unusual, even prophetic in their significance. On February 26, a memorable example of the aurora borealis took place. Its phenomenal description is recounted in the Christian Science Journal, Volume 9, Number 37, page 675. See Appendix for a reproduction of this account. Doris Grekel, in her magnificent biographical work on Mrs. Eddy, provides illumination on the significance of these events. The Arctic aurora of February 26 is not the only sign that appeared in the heavens in 1866 to herald the end of the world, that is, the end of the world of matter, and the beginning of the understanding that man is not material, he is spiritual. The fact that the moon, matter, was under the feet of the woman of the Apocalypse was signified in a manner that had never before occurred in the history of the world. The Granite Monthly recorded, February 1866 had no full moon. This remarkable feat of nature had never happened before, when a full moon had been forecast.